I chose the Kansas State Masters of Agribusiness program for two reasons. The first is program flexibility. I wanted to be able to go to school while maintaining a full-time job. The second is that it's agriculturally focused. I intend on staying in the agriculture industry long-term, and this program complements that with a faculty and staff that know and understand my long-term objectives.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher, as well as this week by Pennsylvania Republican Glenn Thompson. And Congressman Thompson, we appreciate you joining us.
Well, Spencer and Phil, thank you for the opportunity. Great to be back with you.
Well, I want to start this week by summarizing some of the action that we saw in Congress, the rare August session for the House of Representatives. The chamber called back into town for consideration of voting rights legislation, as well as the budget package and the infrastructure package, some procedural votes on those matters. And I want to start on infrastructure. This has been something that there's been a lot of work done on in Washington for a while. We saw the Senate earlier this month clear its version of the bill, and it did so with the support of 19 Republicans. So obviously you're a lot more familiar with the thinking of the House Republican Conference than Phil or I would be. But just wondering, based on conversations you're having with your colleagues, you know, if and when that bill comes to the floor, and we saw that procedural move amongst the Democratic negotiations to get that to happen by September 27th this week, if and when that comes to the floor, what level of Republican support do you think that hard infrastructure bill will achieve?
Well, as you saw this week, they're trying to jam this down the throats of the American people, and quite frankly, through regular order. They're not doing it through regular order; they're compromising regular order. So I don't expect to see a lot of Republican support when you take, first of all, the $1 trillion bill that was, quote, the bipartisan bill. And I will say there's certainly flaws in that bill, none the least that it's being used to leverage the additional $3.5 trillion, almost $5 trillion of total spending. $3.5 trillion of that, where less than $1 trillion has anything to do with infrastructure, not well defined, not targeted, socially driven. Not by truly where need is, but more along the lines of what we've seen from the Biden administration of, sadly, identity politics dividing America. And so I would hope not to see a lot of Republican support for that. I would hope to see some significant defection from the Democratic Party. And, they can't afford to lose too many votes, 5, I guess, at this point, in order to stop things within the House.
I want to turn that $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that they're working on that you mentioned, Mr. Chairman or Ranking Member. The Democrats on your committee, the Democrats on the Senate Ag Committee have already been working on how to allocate their portion of that. And there's about $89 billion in agriculture spending there. That's a lot of money, and much of that would actually go into the farm bill, into the next farm bill. What's not to like about having that additional baseline? Perhaps $30 billion or more, even for conservation.
Well, let's just back up and look at the implications of that bill. I mean, they're proceeding in a self-serving way because they're doing it in a very partisan way. They're doing it outside the way that we've always done farm bill programs, which have been largely bipartisan. I don't need to tell you, gentlemen, that the Agriculture Committee has always been the most bipartisan committee in Congress. We're on that committee, whether we're Republican or Democrat. I would hope, because we care about, the number one industry in America, agriculture, and those people that provide us our food and fiber, let alone the impacts and implications for rural America, which, if we're doing our job right, we're promoting a more robust rural economy. And the fact that they're proceeding unilaterally in really a self-serving way is just wrong. We've always pursued these programs in regular order. We do have another farm bill that's coming up here, hopefully 2023, although we've yet to really started any formal legislative hearings and oversights. We've yet to have Secretary Vilsack before the committee and bring in his undersecretaries and assistant secretaries to be able to share with us a report the implementation of the 2018 Farm Bill. And so the jam thing through a budget reconciliation, and if they're successful at being self-serving and pushing this unilaterally, it's going to fall short. We only do farm bill policy when we do it in the traditional way, in a bipartisan way. We already know that if they're successful, actually, the average 98 out of 100 farms in this country are going to wind up seeing a $1.4 million $1.4 million increase in taxes that they'll have to sell off part of their farm or their ranch to buy back that agriculture operation back from the government. That's not right. That's absolutely wrong. That leads us to farm families can't sustain that. That would be with the passing of a generation, either through capital gains or inheritance tax, the death tax. And in the end, that just leads us to food insecurity. It's not what American farmers and forestry families need at this point in time. And so, they need to pump the brakes on this. And I'm hoping we only need a few common sense Democrats out there to know that if we're going to deal with conservation programs, or we're going to deal with various policies that impact any title in the Farm Bill, there is a proper process to do that. Budget reconciliation, which is usually historically done and used for common interest, common purposes in a bipartisan way, that's not what's happening right now.
It's quite possible they don't get the full $3.5 trillion. Obviously, there's some opposition to that in their own party over on the Senate side. But let's say they do get a substantial portion of it. You do get more money for the Farm Bill. Are you going to feel bound by how that's allocated by the reconciliation bill if it passes?
No, I'm not, and I certainly hope it isn't passed. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And when you do something, you should do it in a proper way. Let's say whatever that wish list, it really has been driven mostly by the liberals and the socialists, right? Of putting things together. We don't know where we need to go with conservation programs because we have not done the oversight. We have not had the hearings. Now, I'm traveling around, obviously, when I can, to different parts of the country, talking with farmers and ranchers, foresters, folks in rural America, agribusinesses. And I'm hearing from them what their needs are. But we need to do that in a formal way to make sure all this excessive spending, this investment, and that's what infrastructure, any infrastructure should be. It should be a specifically driven by documented need. You only do that when you go through regular order, and you only do that effectively when you do it in a bipartisan way. And again, we've had no hearings whatsoever on oversight of the 2018 Farm Bill. We are not prepared to make decisions when we're talking dollar amounts of tens or hundreds of billions of dollars.
I want to turn for a moment to dairy policy, something you've been involved with for quite some time. Big announcement this week from USDA, the Biden administration, that they're putting more money into the dairy margin coverage and doing some retroactive bonus payments on that. The important thing really looking forward is this is going to create $800 million in new baseline for the dairy program, dairy policy and the Farm Bill. That's far more than the entire amount in the 2014 Farm Bill. Just that one move that the administration has made. How are you looking forward on dairy policy and the Farm Bill? Are you satisfied now about where it is? Are there additional changes that you think need to be made going forward?
Well, I'm pleased that. Well, first of all, I'd like to remind the Biden administration, they execute, we legislate. I'm kind of an Article 1 guy of the Constitution. That's the legislative branch. And it was almost too little too late. They have drugged their feet. So I don't give them a lot of credit that we're almost at September 1st, right? And they finally get around to implementing what Congress passed. I believe it was on December 23rd of 2020. President Trump signed into law on December 27th. I am thankful that they finally got around to doing their job. But again, almost too little too late. This was COVID relief. This was to be helpful because of how our dairy farmers' families were struggling. Now, that said, I am appreciative they finally are doing their job. They announced the $350 million in COVID relief payments for the dairy farmers through the Pandemic Market Volatility Assistance Program. And yesterday, USDA announced $400 million in a dairy donation program. And so I think that's welcome news for an industry that has been struggling ever since, quite frankly, in 2010, when the Democrats, not on the Agriculture Committee, because I don't think the Agriculture Committee, Democrats or Republicans would have ever done this, but on the Education and Labor Committee, when they took whole milk and flavor as an option out of our schools. We lost an entire generation of milk drinkers. We cheated a generation, well, maybe over a generation, because those juniors and seniors probably have, back in 2010, probably have children of their own today, since it's 2021. We've cheated them out of nutrition, let alone a great milk experience. And what they did was they tanked the rural economy as a result of that. And so we had tough sledding with dairy because of that prior to COVID. So I was really, I'm disappointed this assistance didn't come sooner in this calendar year. To me, it was kind of a no-brainer. I'm not sure what the holdup was with the Biden USDA, but I am thankful that finally the announcements have been made, and I look forward to seeing that assistance rolled out. In terms of effect on the baseline, again, I come back to the fact that it is Congress, and the COVID relief was really for emergency purposes, right? It was for very specific purposes. It was for a disruption of the food supply chain. I do think as we initiate formal Farm Bill hearings, that needs to be a part of the discussions of what were the variables that disrupted and the implications for disrupting the food or the agriculture supply chain. And are there things that we can incorporate to build resiliency with that? I don't see these emergency measures as impacting the Farm Bill baseline. I've never seen that when it's come to the whole wildfire issue in the past that we've been dealing with for many years, which quite frankly has an agriculture and even a Farm Bill implication, since trees are a crop, with the numerous forestry title programs that we have out there. It hasn't really driven that, and I don't think these emergency measures should be impacting the baseline. We need to be proceeding in a discerning way, and that means evaluating, looking at the data, looking at the facts, and looking at and hearing from the agriculture family, the farm team, as I like to call everybody, not just the elected officials, but the people that raise our food and fiber. We're all one team when it comes to providing food and fiber for this nation.
Congressman, I want to wrap up today talking about something that you've touched on a few times here in this interview, and that is, of course, that 2023 Farm Bill and the process of kind of getting from where we are to that bill being signed into law. Wondering, as the top Republican on the Ag Committee, what have conversations looked like thus far with Chairman Scott in terms of what the schedule or plan is for the House Ag Committee's process, kind of between, again, where we are and potential signage into law for that Farm Bill?
Well, we've obviously had some discussions. We've been more or less responding to putting out fires is the way I would say with the Ag Committee, although the Agriculture Committee has worked in I think a fairly high performing manner. In fact, 3 of the last bills that we passed were unanimous. Chairman Scott, I've always said, is a statesman and a gentleman and a good friend, and so he seeks input and uses it. It seeks my input. That has been very evident in the last 3 pieces of legislation that we've done. I'm hoping when we get back, and right now it's looking like the Speaker is not going to bring us back again until the next to the last week in September. I'm really hoping that we get started with more formal Farm Bill oversight hearings, bringing in people from the industry, and we can use a function hybrid that seems to be working. A hybrid where we do have people in person in the in the hearing room testifying, as well as folks that are testifying using this technology. That's great. But I'm hoping to see that when we get back this fall, that we start to lay out not just the first one, but a plan on how do we do oversight on, as you all know, the Farm Bill is a pretty big piece of legislation. So, so we're really needing to do oversight on every one of the titles within the Farm Bill.
Are those hearings that you think could start to happen potentially as early as, maybe October, assuming that infrastructure, government funding, things like that take up a lot of that September calendar?
I hope so. The basically majority party and the chairman sets the schedule, and that'll certainly be what I think will be helpful requests that I'll make with the chairman. The chairman and I have worked together for 13 years. He's been on the committee a little longer than I have, and like I said, we have a great relationship, and I know that there's some fires we've been dealing with in terms of the issue of broadband. That was probably a leading issue in rural America, and we did do some really good work there with hearings in the bill that we passed on July 14th with a great rural broadband bill that now we need the Democratic leadership to put on the floor for a vote. We did a great bill, as you know, on July 27th with the WIP Plus, that disaster. Now that it's above and beyond crop insurance, doesn't impair the crop insurance program in any way. In fact, it helps protect the integrity of it. That was bipartisan, unanimous vote as well. So those were all things that were sort of put in the wildfire category that were urgent. And then we did some things, obviously, that were among the priorities of the chairman previous to that. But I think it's time I really do think it's time to buckle down and to be focusing on oversight with the Farm Bill. I know that's the kind of things I've been having in just my listening sessions, and whether it's been here at home or quite frankly in different states around the country.
Well, obviously a lot that happened, a pretty action-packed week in the month of August, which is, again, such a rarity on Capitol Hill, but kind of setting up some discussion for the month of September into the next couple of months here in Washington. And Congressman Thompson, we appreciate you stopping by and joining us for a little discussion.
Well, Spencer, Phil, it's always a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
For Congressman Glenn Thompson and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.